Hi, I'm Jesse Alexander and welcome to the Great War. The First World War was a national trauma for Italy, but even though the country was on the winning side, Italian society and politics were more angry and divided than before. The post-armistice years were marked by economic problems, social unrest, political street violence, and terrorist attacks. In 1920 and 1921, Benito Mussolini's new fascist movement would take center stage in the street fighting against the socialists and grow into a force to be reckoned with. So today, we'll take a look at Italy's post-war political violence and Mussolini's metamorphosis from socialist to fascist. And it all happened exactly 100 years ago. Even before the Kingdom of Italy entered the Great War on the Allied side in 1915, it had a long history of political polarization. The nation-state had only been unified in 1861 after a series of wars, and the North was far more industrialized and developed than the rural and poorer South. The growing working class also felt left out of the political process, which was dominated by small elites. This caused the rise of leftist parties like the Italian Socialist Party and the Italian Radical Party, whose rise in popularity was aided by the expansion of the right to vote in 1912. One socialist supporter was up-and-coming journalist and Socialist Party member Benito Mussolini. Mussolini had been raised socialist by his blacksmith father, and in 1911-12 he joined the rest of the Italian left in opposing Italy's war against the Ottoman Empire in Libya. By this point, he'd become a leading figure in the party's revolutionary wing, which called for the overthrow of the liberal democratic system in favor of a proletarian dictatorship. But Mussolini was not a typical socialist. Fellow socialist and former tutor to Mussolini, Angelika Balbanov, later claimed that the Italian was not a true socialist, but a power-hungry activist with a penchant for violence. In his newspaper articles, he promoted a broad, party-based socialism and rejected trade unions as the only path to revolution. Socialism means the elevation and purification of the individual conscience, and its achievement will be the result of a long series of efforts. Everyone, indeed, from the professional man to the worker, can bring a stone to the edifice, doing a socialist deed every day. And so, prepare for the overthrow of existing society. Mussolini also admired philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche's idea of the Superman, since he felt that charismatic and dynamic men would lead the coming revolution. He later reflected on his socialist years. My early experience of socialism was not a doctrinal experience. My doctrine during that period had been the doctrine of action. Many younger socialists were tired of the party's gradualist approach and liked Mussolini's ideas of action. So much so that when Mussolini became the editor of the socialist newspaper Avanti in 1912, he doubled its readership thanks to his aggressive rhetoric. Reformist party leaders accused him of ideological incoherence and dictatorial tendencies, and he was dismissed from some socialist newspapers. So by the time Italy was ready to join the Great War on the Allied side in 1915, Mussolini was an unusual but influential socialist who began to rub party leaders the wrong way. It was the war that would seal his split with the socialists. The outbreak of war in July 1914 led to heated debates in Italy. The country was allied to Germany and Austria-Hungary, but only in case of a defensive war. Liberals and reformist socialists argued for neutrality, while diverse groups from the right and the left called for intervention on the Allied side. Nationalists like poet Gabriele D'Annunzio wanted to go to war to expand Italian territory and influence, while some left-wing revolutionaries hoped that war would lead to the overthrow of the aristocracy and the old order. In July 1914, Mussolini felt that the war was a bourgeois imperialist adventure and argued for neutrality. But by October, he wanted, quote, active and working neutrality, and eventually he came to see the war as an opportunity that could not be missed. We have the privilege of living at the most tragic hour in world history. Do we, as men and as socialists, want to be inert spectators in this huge drama? Or do we want to be, in some way and some sense, the protagonists? This was not a popular view in the Socialist Party, which had an official policy of neither support nor sabotage for the war. Mussolini's article caused him to resign from the Avanti newspaper and be expelled from the party, one of the most important moments in his break with socialism. Mussolini continued to develop his own idea of the war. He still saw war as a catalyst for revolutionary progress, but he also incorporated more nationalist concepts like expanding Italian territory and restoring national prestige. He also volunteered for military service with the Bersaglieri and was wounded on the Isonzo front in 1917. To spread his vision, Mussolini founded a newspaper called Il Popolo d'Italia with money from industrial donors like Fiat. At first, it also had the word socialist in its title, which he then dropped. By 1918, it claimed to be the Journal of Combatants and Producers. So Mussolini was estranged from the Socialist Party, but ran his own newspaper to spread his revolutionary nationalism. Italy did eventually enter the war in May 1915 in order to gain new territory, but the disappointing peace conference left many Italians feeling bitter and looking towards radical solutions. Italy's First World War had not gone according to plan. Its armies failed to break through the Austrian lines in the Alps and suffered a major disaster at Caporetto in 1917. The belated victory at Vittorio Veneto in 1918 didn't do much to change the critical attitude of its allies either, like this quip reported by British Ambassador to France, Edward Stanley. They all say that the signal for an armistice was the signal for Italy to begin to fight. During the war, Mussolini abandoned his belief that war could bring social revolution. At first, he praised the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 in Russia, but Vladimir Lenin's peace deal with Germany was a crushing blow to Mussolini's theory. Mussolini gave up on revolutionary socialism for good, and for the time being, he was not strictly tied to one ideology. An Italian police report came to that same conclusion. Mussolini was intensely ambitious, but did not always stick to his convictions and ideals. After the war, nationalists like D'Annunzio were disappointed that the peace deal did not grant Italy as much territory as its government had asked for, and considered the war a mutilated victory. They felt that Italy's sacrifice of 600,000 dead had been betrayed by Democrats and Socialists at the negotiating table in Paris and in the parliament in Rome. Mussolini also railed against the, quote, parasites of the Socialist Party, and promoted a new allegiance not based on class, but on national syndicalism supported by shared experiences. Mussolini envisioned a new elite class that should lead the nation, made up of veterans of the war. He called it the Trenchocracy. Many veterans, especially of the elite Arditi, liked what they read, like future fascist leader Italo Balbo. When I returned from the war, like so many, I hated politics and politicians. To come home after struggling and fighting to the country of Prime Minister Giolitti, who offered every ideal as an object of sale? No. Better to deny everything, to destroy everything, so as to rebuild everything from scratch. By 1919, frustrated nationalist veterans began to create organizations like the National Association of Combatants, and to mix with other nationalist groups like the Futurists, an artistic movement that appreciated modernity, technology, and violence. Not all veterans were violent nationalists. Many joined socialist veterans associations, and even the nationalistic associations sometimes adopted pacifist ideals. But Mussolini and others tried to control the image of the veteran for political gains, presenting them as fellow enemies of the Bolsheviks and democratic political class. So angry veterans, nationalists, and Mussolini had begun to find common ground in the turbulence of post-war Italy. The tie that would soon bind them together in a new movement was fascism. The term fascism literally means bunch or group, and was used in the Roman Empire to describe a bundle of rods carried by officials called lictors to represent their authority. In the 19th century, it had also been used by some radical groups, and some left-wingers referred to themselves as fascistic in the sense of order, strength, and unity. Fascism became a common term in modern Italy starting in 1919, and Benito Mussolini eventually came to personify fascism and its connection to extreme nationalism. Italian fascism can be described as a reconceptualization of rightist themes with leftist vocabulary, especially the call for revolution. But the fascist idea of revolution was national and not class-based. Historian Emilio Gentile identified the key elements of Italian fascism: the conception of politics as a form of art, the transformation of ideas into myths, an ambivalent attitude to the masses, which are both despised and seen as a force of change, an elitist view of historical progress, the possibility of social rebirth, and an overall pessimistic view of humanity. With the momentum of these ideas growing, on March 23, 1919, Mussolini created the Fasci Italiani di Combattimento, or FIC. His address to the new organization connected it to his so-called Trenchocracy. The meeting of March 23rd addresses its first salute and its memory and reverent thoughts to the sons of Italy who have fallen for the greatness of the fatherland and the liberty of the world, to the mutilated and the disabled, to all the fighters, to the ex-prisoners who did their duty, and it declares to be ready to vigorously support the claims of material and moral order that will be advocated by the associations of fighters. In June, Il Popolo d'Italia laid out the demands of the FIC. The fascists called for the abolition of the Senate, a new National Assembly, universal suffrage, a national militia, and a foreign policy that, quote, values the place of Italy in the world. It also promoted traditionally leftist ideas like an 8-hour workday, minimum wage, labor representation, and the nationalization of war industries. Mussolini was trying to win over the workers while opposing what he saw as socialist elites. We can't, however, go against the people, because it was the people who fought the war. The peasants who today move to solve the agrarian question cannot be regarded by us with antipathy. But the FIC and Mussolini were still minor players in the struggle for leadership of the fascist movement. D'Annunzio was still seen as the spiritual father of fascism, and it was he who'd come up with the black shirt uniform and Roman salute. He also gained notoriety with his occupation of Fiume in November 1919, an action that Mussolini publicly supported while doing little to help, which soured relations between the two men. So fascism was gathering strength, but was still far smaller and weaker than socialism in Italian politics. But the balance of power would soon change. In the November 1919 elections, the FIC got just 4,000 votes, while the Socialist Party received 1.8 million, more than any other party. The Socialists publicly paraded a coffin to symbolize Mussolini's political death, but Mussolini was still confident. There are victories which are as crushing as defeats. Italy now entered a period known as the Biennio Rosso, or the 2 red years. The political tensions that had built up because of the war now began to spill over into open street violence between socialists, nationalists, and the forces of the state. The socialist movement seemed to be the strongest force in the country as the Biennio Rosso began. Trade unions had grown, and the Socialist Party had been elected in a third of the major towns and cities. In some places, peasants began to occupy uncultivated land in anticipation of a coming revolution, which brought clashes with landowners and police. But the socialist movement was divided between moderate reformers and radical revolutionaries, led by Antonio Gramsci, who called for a Bolshevik-style revolution. Eventually, Gramsci would break with the party, but the infighting made it vulnerable. Many middle-class landowners and professionals were afraid of the socialists and turned to fascism and its doctrine of action. The first major fascist raid took place on November 21, 1919, as 300 fascists attacked socialist politicians at a swearing-in ceremony in Bologna's Palazzo da Curzio. 10 socialists were killed in what became a long campaign of political violence. Social Democrat Ivanoe Bonimo recalled. After the tragedy in Bologna, the rural property classes were stirred to action and began to meet and organize themselves. In the towns of the Po Valley, young officers who'd served at the front summoned their landowning friends and relatives and told them they needed to defend themselves against those who'd been opposed to the war and now repudiated the victory, against those who were inciting violence and disorder, against those that wanted to establish the dictatorship of the proletariat and repeat the Russian experiment. In the following months, landowners and industrialists began to lend more support to the fascists, whose black shirts attacked socialists. Peasants in isolated villages were beaten or forced to drink large quantities of castor oil, which is a powerful laxative. Between 56 and 68% of fascist squad members were veterans, but they were joined also by younger middle-class Italians, including many university graduates. Unemployment was high, and young people often blamed the government. Also joining with the fascists were men who were too young to have fought in the war and now had a chance to team up with the Arditi and join the Trenchocracy. Police often turned a blind eye or joined in themselves. And the violence appeared to work. 1 million agricultural workers had struck in 1919, but only 80,000 did so in 1920. Meanwhile, membership in fascist organizations reached 250,000 in 1921, and attacks increased. In the first 5 months of 1921, fascist black shirts attacked 300 socialist organizations and killed 200 people. So the socialist success at the polls was met by a violent response from fascists, who positioned themselves as defenders of law and order. Prime Minister Giovanni Giolitti now made the fateful decision and reached out to Mussolini. The liberal Giolitti was in his 5th term as Prime Minister in 1921, and he was struggling to counter the Socialists and the Catholic Centre Party. So he decided to create an alliance of his own with the upstart fascists, whom he thought he could control. The fascists are but fireworks. They'll make a great deal of noise, but only leave smoke behind. In the elections of May 1921, the fascists achieved their first electoral success as part of Giolitti's bloc, and Mussolini was elected to parliament. Giolitti was not impressed, since his new partner rarely attended sessions and didn't openly support the liberals. Mussolini did, however, temper his rhetoric in front of parliament. For us, violence is not a system, nor an aestheticism, far less a sport. It is a brutal necessity to which we have been driven. And I add, we are prepared to disarm if you too will disarm, your spirits especially. For if we continue like this, the nation runs a serious risk of plunging into the abyss. Mussolini also wanted to make peace with the socialists, since the violence had served its purpose. He hoped to gain control of the fascist movement by reducing the violence and building his own legitimacy. But that was easier said than done, since he faced challenges from within his own movement, and fascist squad commanders often acted independently. When Mussolini signed a pact of pacification with the Socialist Party in August, the squad leaders revolted. Some even suggested D'Annunzio should now take over, even though he'd been weakened by his failure at Fiume in 1920. In protest, Mussolini resigned as the Duce, or leader of the Fasci di Combattimento. This was a tactical move, and he went on to create the National Fascist Party on November 9, 1921. At the party's founding, he rejected his former socialist ideals and spoke of the glory of Italy. The Italian people have a great history. It is enough to come down to Rome to feel that 20 or 30 centuries ago, it was the center of the world, and the Italians of the last centuries were great in arts, literature, and business. From its people, the genius of Dante and Napoleon was expressed. So by the end of 1921, Mussolini had positioned himself as the central figure of a new, organized fascist party based on right-wing nationalism and couched in socialist rhetoric. But the fascist movement was still far smaller than its socialist rival. In fact, the FIC was still the smallest party in parliament. For Mussolini, the road to power in Rome would not come through the ballot box. Now that we've tackled the rise of Italian fascism in this video, I want to take a moment to talk to you about YouTube, where you're watching this video right now. YouTube is more important than ever, and we like that our videos are here as free educational content. But we aren't one of the gigantic creators that you read about on the news that lay back and get rich thanks to the algorithm. History content is not sexy enough for YouTube, it generates less ad revenue, and it's often about complex topics that are also sometimes messy. And that can be a problem for us as a small independent production company. Just this month, YouTube started age restricting some of our videos after they've been on the platform for 7 years. 7 years. As a small creator, we want to have a platform that's made for educational content like ours. And so we built exactly that with Nebula, an independent, creator-owned streaming platform where we and a whole bunch of other smart people upload their content, ad-free and usually a bit earlier than on YouTube. We want to thank Mark Newton for his help with this episode. As usual, you can find all our sources for the episode in the video description. And if you want to support our channel, you can support us on Patreon, and the links for that are in the video description below as well. I'm Jesse Alexander, and this is The Great War 1921, a production of Real-Time History and the only YouTube history channel reminding its viewers to drink castor oil responsibly.